monumental miscellanea, and funerary paraphernalia. It's Archaeodeath. So this is about a very distinctive topic that I didn't think I'd ever do a presentation on. Football archaeology. I'm not a great football fan, to be honest with you. That's not really the point. What I'm interested in is how we as archaeologists, as explorers of the past, the material past from different periods, can explore and think about a TV phenomenon. The FX produced, Disney Plus streamed Welcome to Wrexham TV show. And I've been following along and watching this for the last four seasons. And Wrexham are in the English Championship League now, having risen rapidly with the celebrity support or celebrity owners, Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. And so this is now the streaming of the TV show is part of that celebrity phenomenon of affluent Canadian American team up partnership in buying a Welsh football club. But it's a Welsh football club that's always been in the English Football League. Wrexham is a borderland city. And that is crucial for understanding the story I'm going to tell you. And so here's the blurb that I circulated as part of the broader archaeology of games and gaming, of sports. There's also already been archaeologists investigating footballing heritage, soccer heritage, the built environments and the material culture. But what about the use of heritage and archaeology within sports documentaries? And I haven't seen anyone address that. How archaeology and heritage appear in these shows in various ways, in terms of the way in which the story is told and the places that are connected to the materialities of the physical environments. And so I want to use the first four seasons of Welcome to Wrexham to take you on a journey into the ways that the TV show charts the fortunes of Wrexham AFC and its celebrity owners and draws on and portrays the past through material culture, built environments, and the historic landscape. So this raises broader questions about how archaeology operates in our world, how people draw on the material past, not necessarily just archaeologists in teaching and research, but the broader public, and how we represent all the different aspects of sport: age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and nationality. And hopefully it'll prompt reflection on how we use the past to craft stories, particularly about post-industrial rehabilitation and regeneration through sport, because that is the overarching narrative of the TV show, is that sport is a salvation economically, socially, culturally for communities. This is the claim. This is the narrative, that we're looking at a Welsh borderland city of Wrexham and how place, memory, and identity are bound together in the way sport is portrayed. So this is about how support sports, and particularly football clubs, like to see themselves, want to promote themselves, and how they are using the material past, from material culture, built environments, and historic landscapes to make their argument. And I'm not saying that's the way it is. I'm not saying that's the way it should be or isn't. I'm saying we can explore, we can track as archaeologists, we can interrogate how our popular media are telling that story. So and that's what I'm trying to do as an archaeologist here. So I'm going to take you on a little journey through four stages, but this came from my blog. So I write this academic blog, 5 essays per month. I've just written five this month, and next month I'll do another five. And every month I produce a reflection on how mortuary archaeology and the archaeology of memory interacts with contemporary society. So I do reviews of video games a little bit, but I'm not really a gamer. Mostly films and TV, and museums and heritage sites, and how they present the dead and memorials. And I also look at new research. And two posts, one from January 2024 and one from July 2025, I did a review of the TV show, the series 1 and 2, and then series 3 and 4. So this is a kind of archaeology digging into a TV show. But before we do that, we need to step back and think about what is football archaeology. So I'm going to give you 4 sections. The archaeology of football, and think about the themes of community, place, and materialities of memory. Then I'm going to take you into the TV show, the archaeology of football on TV. Then I'm going to look at the archaeology of Wrexham's actual cityscape and how there's an interaction between what the TV show is showing and what's going on in Wrexham in its physical space today. And then I'm going to look at a missing feature and think about why it's missing, the forgotten frontier of Wrexham, and think about why the TV show isn't talking about it. And I'm going to try and give you a suggestion of why I think they're not thinking about it. Okay, so that's the kind of structure of the talk. And I said I'll probably be finished by 7 here in 50 minutes, and then we can have time for chat and see what you think. Because I haven't presented this before, so if you think it all is nonsense, that's fine, because I want to encourage critical thinking. And if you think I've missed important points or I've misrepresented something, that is all part of the discussion. And if you think that I've said something that applies elsewhere, I'd love to hear about that, maybe to baseball or to other football clubs or something. That's all very interesting. So I want to hear what you have to say, what you think about this. So let's start off briefly by giving an introduction to the archaeology of football and the focus of a lot of studies that have been going on over the last 15 years in the archaeology of sport and the archaeology of sport, communal sports and its relationship with communities has been to think about how sports create links between community, place, and materialities. Not necessarily just the players, but the audiences, the people that benefit and connect in through their own businesses, their own working lives to sporting activities. So that's why I come in. I'm a kind of on the edges of this, watching Wrexham, hearing Wrexham's football ground sometimes when I'm in Wrexham, which is my local city. If I didn't explain that, I work in Chester, but Wrexham's just across the border. I have Welsh ancestry. I live in Wales, and Wrexham is my home city. And I want to start off by explaining there are a number of ways in which archaeologists have already been thinking about football, particularly. And already they've used it as a metaphor and analogy. And here's 2 examples I'm already aware of. For example, I'm aware that archaeologists have long talked about my period, the early Middle Ages in Britain, at a time when there are lots of different small sub-kingdoms and kingdoms that are politically and militarily competing with each other. And it's a long established metaphor and analogy to think of them as football teams playing against each other, competing. Whether that's accurate or fair or not, I don't know. I also just came across a paper from 2015 by a colleague at the University of Cardiff, Cardiff University, who used football as an analogy to understand life in Iron Age hill forts. So these are just 2 examples of how archaeologists think with football. They use football as an analogy. But archaeologists also dig up football. And often we're digging below and before football grounds are built. And this is true of other kinds of sports stadium. So a good example is the excavations that were done by Wessex Archaeology, one of our UK commercial archaeologists, ahead of the building of Southampton's new St Mary's Stadium. And they found not only evidence of Middle Anglo-Saxon, sort of 7th to 9th century settlement, they found a burial ground associated with that early trading site of the early medieval kingdom of Wessex. So, archaeologists do a lot of work ahead of sports grounds being built, right? So archaeologists are one of the many places that archaeologists dig and if you look at newspaper headlines across Europe, you'll see many other archaeologists discover ahead of the development of a sports stadium or during the rebuilding of a sports stadium or ahead of infrastructure work linked to a sports stadium. So archaeology is often linked to sport because we're finding things below and before football grounds and other stadia. But archaeologists have increasingly over the last 30 years been aware that we have an important role in recording and analysing the history of sport. because we as a subject can get into the material evidence, looking at the origins, use, significance, and afterlives of stadia, clubs, and their communities. So we can dig into those communities. And I'll share in a minute some slides with a slide with the some of the key publications on the archaeology of sporting grounds. And those football archaeologists aren't just about the football grounds, the stadia, but also portable objects, kits, badges, signs, pitches, souvenirs, training grounds, built environments, the broader communities and landscapes. So archaeology of sport is the archaeology of all of us, because whether we participate or attend or engage, we're all living in communities where at different levels, amateur, professional, sporting is an aspect. And we can chart that back in different times, different cultures, into the ancient past, but we can also look at the rise of football from the 19th century through archaeological means, looking at everything from road names, stadium names, and so on. And a further aspect is that a key contribution of archaeology has been to the conservation, management, and interpretation of stadia and clubs, including many of these stadia have shrines or museums. So they are heritage spaces for communities. And in Wrexham, they're currently building the museum, and part of it will be the National Museum of Football for Wales. So there'll be a museum next door to the stadium, which is something I'm not going to talk about on purpose in this talk because it still hasn't opened and I can't evaluate it and I'm not involved. But I wanted you to be aware of those heritage elements. And so linking all those together, we can look at what I would call football memoryscapes, the ways in which football is connected to place and community through social memory. And what we can do as archaeologists is dig into how those social memories are materialized, how a community is defining itself and connecting itself through memory. So here's some of the existing literature that's out there, and I can share the slides with any of you if you want. I'd be more than happy to, so you can follow up on some of these. So archaeologists working on the archaeology of football grounds in Turkey, in Lancashire, all around the world. And these are particularly football references to work done on football grounds. But there are many ways in which archaeologists have been researching the archaeology of football. So that's a bit of backstory to explain that there's already an established field linked to sports heritage and sports history of the archaeology of football. Second point, what about Welcome to Wrexham, this TV show then? Well, I started watching this, aware of that research and thinking, well, how are they showing the material past? How are they using through the TV show? How are they representing the landscape? And this is an example of how the materiality of memory is communicated through TV, linking community and identity. And there are a number of ways in which I think the TV show does this. Firstly, they're focusing on the industrial heritage of the city, particularly coal and steel, but other manufacturing industries too. Wrexham was a key part of the Industrial Revolution for Britain and the world. And it was an integral part of a burgeoning with other communities up and down the northeast Wales area, including Rwabon, and right the way up to the Greenfield Valley in Flintshire. This was a part of the industrial northeast Wales, and its traces are still full of the contemporary landscape, the city, the villages around, the county borough, including the World Heritage Site of Pont-to-Sucta Aqueduct. So this is a really important, iconic piece of architecture linked to the Industrial Revolution. And also a prominent part of the landscape of Wrexham is the Gresford mining disaster of 1934, where large numbers of miners were trapped underground due to an explosion and perished and were regretfully, tragically, entombed there. They could not retrieve the bodies. So the landscape of Wrexham is haunted by the presence of this pre-Second World War mining disaster, where the incompetence and bad practices of the mine owners went with very little criticism and prosecution. There was no real restitution for the lives lost, the families left destitute, and the echoes down the generations that has left on the community of Wrexham. And the TV show focuses on that, but it also focuses on the city's heritage and its regeneration and the tourism, the businesses, new businesses started up linked to the football grounds fortunes, the Wrexham Miners Project near the football ground, and the Rodney Reynolds Memorial Park, established on a abandoned piece of ground in the city centre. So the TV show takes you on the journey of how the investment by Reynolds and McElhenney has fed into the community, has affected the heritage spaces. And also, a third way the TV show charts this link between materiality, community, and identity is through the turf pub and the Kairas, the stadium itself, the racecourse stadium. And we see a particular focus on the destruction and rebuilding of the Cop stand, the open air stand at the east end of the stadium. And also on other themes, such as the death of a 100-year-old fan and the memorialization of the Welsh Paul character from the recent Deadpool and Wolverine film, in which one of the players plays an iteration of Deadpool, Welsh Paul. We also have colonial links with Argentina in Patagonia, and colonization is and colonialism is celebrated and reaffirmed, those connections of what Wrexham to the world through those connections to Argentina. And the legendary and mythological comes in with the red dragon and metaphors of death and resurrection of Welsh people and salvation through football. So these ideas come back again and again of football's going to save this downtrodden working class community from its post-industrial collapse, and revitalizing the city, the landscape, the stadium itself, it connections around the world, and a sort of mythological nationalistic rebirth. These are the themes that the TV show plays through again and again. So let me show you some of the images. So the TV show is repeatedly showing you the countryside around Wrexham. So here is a view from the snapshot from the show. This is Collier's Park. That's the village of Gresford, one of a series of villages where mining villages as well as rural agricultural villages. It's got a beautiful medieval church, which probably has Roman origins. So they're portraying showcasing the countryside, the city. There's always incidental images. You can get a good sense of the topography of Wrexham from the TV show alone. This has obviously promoted tourism, that's regenerated the city, and the World Heritage Site of Pontefract Aqueduct, which takes the Llangollen Canal over the River Dee. There's Acrofia and Kevin Mauer downstream. These are all shown as part of the landscape of Northeast Wales. They feature in the opening credits miners from Gresford and other Northeast Wales coal mines. And there is an entire episode dedicated to the Gresford mining disaster and the colliery disaster memorials, including the Pithead Wheel. For the Kairas itself, the stadium, they constantly feature the stadium. And there's Reynolds with the Welsh Paul uniform displayed in the Kairas. And the focus through the 4 seasons is on the destruction of the Cop and its rebuilding and the vision. They're building it at the moment, right? They haven't finished this. They're still building the new stadium. This is an artist's impression by the architects of how it will look. So the story of the TV show is one of destruction and regeneration physically, and that physical watching is through the 4 seasons. You're taken on the journey of seeing the physical space of the landscape, the cityscape, and the stadium going through that regeneration. And one episode focuses on the death of Arthur Massey, a 100-year-old individual, lived to 100 years, and remembering his contribution with scenes of the funeral procession walking past his club. He was a fan. His name on the wall when the stadium was rebuilt, honoring that connection of the fans, the community, the place, and the materiality of the stadium itself. And there's this very evocative scene where they have a kind of ghostly apparition of the dead man as he touches and moves through the stadium. It's a bit sentimental and not to everyone's taste, but it does show the TV show is trying to narrate that connection of people, place, and material culture of football. So the football, the things, his hat, his scarf on an empty seat, his form moving past the memorial brick on the physically built into the stadium. This is the material. This is a memory scape of individual fans and of all fans through the TV show. So the show is paying a lot of attention to the landscape, its reconstitution, its rebuilding, and its fans' lives and deaths. The connections to Argentina and the Patagonian fans is another feature of another episode. So they pay for Argentinian fans to come over. They're very, shall we say, they play fast and light with the story of the colonization of the Americas. It's all seen as a good news story, and there's no reflections on decolonial indigeneity or anything like that. It's very light touch, but still, what it tries to do, I think, is connect Wrexham to the world and a Welsh world beyond the area and the dragons. There's a whole episode in season 4 focusing on dragons, which, of course, the red dragon is such an icon of Wales. It's our flag, and the fight against the English, the white dragon, is enshrined in myths linked to the archaeological site of Dinas Emrys in northwest Wales. But it's connected here to Wrexham and the fortunes of Wrexham. Wrexham fights back. It's coming back. So this idea of resurrection through the power of the dragon. So the principal narratives I see in Welcome to Wrexham, over the meta narratives underlying all the story of the football and the sort of the drama and the humor, is this idea of place shaping through the historic landscape and the industrial heritage. It's everywhere in the docuseries. You can't escape its scenes of working class housing or of abandoned factories, mines. And the opening credits tell you the story of a community shattered by disaster and the closing of the coal mines in the 1980s under the Thatcher administration, and then a community rebuilding. So it's about civic identity and national identity forged, the underdogs and their return to the English Football League on the pitch, but also the community comes with them. That's the idea. This constant idea of big business and local heritage together building a new legacy. And cultural heritage is celebrated, but also valorized and commodified through material regeneration and commemoration. So it's very much a capitalist story of competitive sport, bringing in big bucks, and the community rises through trickle down economics. Everyone gets a little crumbs from the table and everyone rises together. This is not I'm just telling you the way I see it, and perhaps there are obvious things we can say about whether that's really such a lovely thing or not. Certainly new money, tourism has come into the community, but the TV show is doing a job of, it's propaganda. It's part of a rhetoric of narrative, using heritage to narrate this story. So that's what I think's going on with Welcome to Wrexham. It'd be interesting to see what happens in seasons 5 and so on. But this is what I haven't talked about in my blog yet, and is my third part of my talk, is that this is actually having a profound effect on the landscape of Wrexham. So Wrexham's landscape is changing because of this. It's not simply a TV fantasy. There is a lot of integrity in what is shown on the TV show. I recognize a lot of what Wrexham is and has been in the TV show. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's lies. It's a story. It's a story rooted in place. And that place is changing. And there's many aspects of it I can't pick up here. The flag fervour that hit the UK in the summer of 2025 is a subject of a whole other conversation about why the UK started putting up flags on lampposts, flags in public places, particularly English, but also Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish. There's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric. There's a lot of anti-minority rhetoric. A lot of it was fed by far-right groups. But in Northeast Wales, it was interesting to see where flags were maintained through to the Christmas of 25 and after. And one of the key places was outside the football ground. And here, the Dry Goch, the Welsh dragon flags, have been left up. And here, they're much more connected, less to anti-immigrant statements and anti-minority statements. They're much more about pride in Welshness and in the football ground, and opposing English nationalism and English rhetorics because Wrexham is a border city that very much has long sort of fought a sense of a keen sense of distinction from England and the English. And this has come out now and is materialized in the landscapes. I took this picture just a few days ago outside the Kairas. This is the stadium. The stadium actually hasn't changed from this angle, from the main approach to the stadium. This is nothing to do with Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. This physical structure and its memorial wall of bricks that I showed you with Arthur Massey here, this is as was. This is almost identical. But what is changing? This is the Turf Pub, which is next to the stadium and goes back to the 19th century and was the pub associated with the football, the race course, as it was called, where the football ground began. And I should have said that the reason why Wrexham is so proud of its heritage is this is one of the oldest football grounds in the world. And the pub is the manifestation of that. That's the anchor, the oldest material element that you can see next to the new noughties, football ground. So the pub is not particularly old in English or Welsh terms, but it is important as a manifestation of that past, and it's featured in the TV show repeatedly. But what has changed is the way in which sponsorship and particularly murals have been used to populate the landscape of Wrexham. So here again, I took this at the weekend. These are around the grounds. This is the back of the turf, and you've got Phil Parker, the manager of the team. You've got Reynolds and McElhenney stylized as Welsh women in Welsh traditional hats. Croesio Wrexham. So welcome to Wrexham in Welsh. So you have their identities as celebrities caricatured, self-mocking to a degree, and but implanted on the space. So they're part of this heritage landscape now. The first piece of identity construction was for the TV show itself, that Welcome to Wrexham by FX had their own mural put up on the end of the house. Now, a bit of backstory here. In the UK, end of terrace house murals like this have a deep time origin in advertising. So in the 19th century, the ends of houses would be a good place to have an advert, and the working class owners of the property could benefit. But in recent times, particularly in the mid to late 20th century, this kind of mural is often associated with sectarianism and Northern Ireland, but it has been reclaimed out of that sort of religious connotations of communities in conflict to be more popularly used in promoting community identity. So many towns and cities around the UK, including in Wales, have reclaimed this kind of mural in a positive way to celebrate aspects of history and identity that are inclusive. And so that is, I think, what was behind this choice. And more recently, Joey Jones, former footballer at Wrexham, who passed away, King of the Kop, has been given his own mural on the Turf Pub. But it's not simply in that landscape. The temporary hoarding that has been put up while they rebuild the Kop stand has been given local artists used to represent key players from the women's team, the men's team, fans, and players, as well as the mascot, the dragon mascot. So this is a very recent, and it's temporary, but what it does is it shows how the club and its identity are being projected into the community space, and it's also into the city. Before I leave the football ground, this is an interesting. I find this very interesting. I'm not an expert in all this, but this is the temporary hoarding around the other side, and what they've done. This is pretty typical of late 20th, early 21st century material culture, of capturing in sort of silhouette form something of the identity of places, and this could be broken down and analysed in itself. So you've got these three icons here, a sort of a bus links, railway links, and a university town, the University of Wrexham University, sorry. You've got a footballer, obviously. You've got construction, talk about the future. You've got a tree symbolizing the landscape, a horse symbolizing Bangor-on-Dee and the local horse races, one of the oldest racecourses, apart from Chester is older, in the UK. And at the centre, a church, which I think is supposed to represent St Giles Church, which is one of the seven wonders of Wales. And also Pontefract Aqueduct. So this is not so much about the city, but the region, the area, and celebrating that sort of investment of corporate sponsors, Transport for Wales, Wrexham University, in the rebuilding of the COP. So it's really interesting. It's corporate material culture drawing on heritage, a World Heritage Site, and a medieval church with its famous church tower. And within the city, we also have other murals that have been established, two at the near the Eagles Meadow, one on the side of the Fat Boar pub, um, featuring Paul Mullins, player, and another one by Boots, featuring past players, managers, and celebrities associated, local celebrities, local heroes associated with the football ground. So you have this sense of, um, and this is a screen grab from the artist page, fearless in devotion. So the landscape of Wrexham is changing, and the Memorial Park, which is hoping to be opened, is a space that is being dedicated to community activities and art. Here it is in its form from last year, building this sense of um, community connection to the football club. So there are and the Wrexham Miners project, just over the road from the football club, has been a focus of one of the episodes in season 4, I think, where one of the Humphrey goes on a charity run, a marathon, to raise money for the Wrexham Miners project. So the links to local charities, and the identity of the mining heritage of Wrexham is absolutely key. And indeed, in season 2 of Welcome to Wrexham, Rob McElhenney expresses the desire for one of the pithead wheels of Gresford Colliery. There's one used for the memorial to the miners. The other one is as an eco garden. And he expresses his desire for this to be translated and raised at the new COP development. Now, whether that actually happens or not will be interesting to follow. But there is an explicit desire to link the sports club to the mining heritage. So my third area has therefore been to point out that the TV show and the actual real world landscape are in conversation or in dialogue. And the material culture, the way that Wrexham is portraying its past, and the new museum, which is going to reopen, is going to be an interesting part of that, are connected to this story of industrialization, decline, and then regeneration. And sport is seen as part of that, creating hope, optimism, and economic benefit. And so we're going to see this story play out. They're telling their own narrative of how material, the landscape and the people and the place and sport connect to each other. And now to my final section, which is A Forgotten Frontier, Watts Dyke and Wrexham. So what's this about? So here is where I get a little bit more critical of the way they're telling the story of the city of Wrexham and its landscape. And it'd be interesting to see. I've been waiting to see how they address this, if they ever address this, and they haven't so far. So for what you may not be aware of, one of my research interests in the early Middle Ages, in late antiquity in the early Middle Ages, is the linear earthworks, Britain's longest ancient monuments, and they run through the borderlands of what is to become England and what is to become Wales, Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke. And Offa's Dyke is perhaps better known. It's far longer than Hadrian's Wall, and it runs intermittently. We don't know if it was continuous from Troedden in Flintshire south to the Wye, and then there's a section along the Wye Valley down to the Severn confluence, and near Chepstow, just east of Chepstow. But you might not have heard of a second really significant monument that runs parallel to what Offa's Dyke, from Basingwork in Flintshire down to Maysbury in Shropshire, called Watts Dyke. And here's a stylisation from one of my articles about it, show you so you can see them. There's a third monument you may have heard of called Wansdyke, which runs from the Avon, the Somerset Avon, to the Kennet, but that we won't talk about that today. And this monument has been excavated many times, but recently work by formerly Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust and more recently, they're called Heneb, they've changed their name, has found and dated the monument of Wat's Dyke. Here, excavations at Erddig Park near Wrexham. Um, Yes, exactly, Valerie. That's what you've got where Valerie in the chat has got exactly where I'm going with this, is this doesn't quite sit with the narrative of the football club. And I think I'll show you why, right? So this is a monument that was built by the Mercians, most likely, in the 8th or early 9th centuries. The Mercian was the sort of Midlands English Anglo-Saxon kingdom long before there was an England. Against not one, but multiple Welsh polities, including Powys and possibly later Gwynedd and others further south, including Brycheiniog. And that was Offa's and Wat's may have been facing off against some of these polities too. And it's a big bank and ditch. And even here, where it's completely gone, you can see the bank and the ditch surviving. But originally, it would have been much more monumental. Here are some photographs of Wat's at other locations where it survives. This is at the Rookery near Erddig, and this is where it survives in front of housing at Hope in Flintshire. This is the map of Wat's Dyke, and this narrower line is the northern extremity of Offa's Dyke. And here's a schematic for when it was excavated near Gabowen in Shropshire, showing you what it would have looked like: a big ankle breaker ditch and then a bank on the east side. So this was a piece of monumental earthwork building as a wall against the Welsh in traditional terms. And we don't have any historical records for who built Wat's Dyke, but Offa's Dyke is, we know from a records a century later, Asa, the Welsh biographer of Alfred the Great, the West Saxon king, tells us there was a tyrannical king of old called Offa who built a wall, a dyke, a wallia from sea to sea against the Welsh. So these are monuments that are military, territorial, and also ideological. They're about defining and claiming territory, crafting a frontier long before the Norman and English frontier of the later Middle Ages. And this is from some of my work, trying to reinterpret how these monuments were placed in the landscape. They were carefully placed to block streams and surveil the landscape to their west. And this was about Mercia facing off against a whole eclectic mixture of different kingdoms in the peninsula they're making a peninsula of Wales. They're making Western Britain into a peninsula. And in many ways, these are the monuments that make the Welsh. The Welsh weren't Welsh before the monuments were built, because the language and culture of what we now call Wales was shared with the Cornish, with the Cumbrians, and large proportions of people living in the kingdoms that we now describe as English. So this was about making a Wales. And so through my open access journal, which I edit and work with a collaboratory of researchers, we've been re-energizing research in these borderlands. And you can read all about that in academic research that we were doing to understand not only these monuments, Wat's Dyke and Offa's Dyke, but other comparative ancient and early medieval and later walls. And we've done work on the public archaeology of how these walls are interpreted. Are they seen as barriers today? Are they seen as redundant, sorry. So an edited collection from 2020 with students looking at how these frontiers and borderlands work in contemporary society and how we can use them to educate and engage communities. And one of the things I've been looking at is how Wat's Dyke is interpreted in heritage terms. And I'm going to get back to Wrexham in a minute. Hopefully it'll be obvious where I'm going here. But there's only a series of eclectic locations where the public are told where Wat's Dyke is. And these are those. In fact, the best place to see Wat's Dyke on the ground explained is in Wrexham's municipal cemetery, where the original western boundary of the Victorian Garden Cemetery is, yes, Claudd Wat. That's the Welsh name for Wat's Dyke. I take students there, and a local man said to me, "Oh, you're going to look at Offa's Dyke? It runs by my house." And I go, I didn't want to correct him and say, "I'm sorry, it's not Offa's Dyke, it's Wat's Dyke, but don't argue with locals." So I just went, "Yes, we are. Thank you very much." And he was very interested. But the point is, this is a piece of historic landscape. It's a piece of grade 2 heritage, listed heritage, but the dyke itself is running through the landscape. And here it is recorded on the floor: Claudd Wat and Wat's Dyke over the bank of Wat's Dyke. And here's a shot showing you all the different heritage interpretation. But these things are so big, and because they're not made of stone, it's really difficult to explain them to the public. Some of these signs have been abandoned. Some of them are just cheesy and out of date. Some of them sort of promote of a sort of ethno-nationalist view of the English and the Welsh as like some ever fighting, ever conflicting. Some of them are a bit wishy-washy and vague, but all of them, it's very difficult for local people to know where Wattsdyke is, what it was, what was Wattsdyke, and how we understand it in the contemporary landscape. This was outside Wrexham Museum, but is now removed. And it explains the history of Wrexham Borough and shows Wattsdyke running on the western side of the historic township boundaries, but doesn't tell you what Wattsdyke is. It just has it on the map and you're supposed to know. And that's an example of the problem that a lot of people living in the region don't understand what Wattsdyke is. So I tried to remedy that with the help of a friend, an artist and archaeologist, John G. Swagger, who is a internationally renowned communicator of heritage. And he uses comic style to tell people about the past. And here for Oswestry's heritage project, in 4-panel comics, he tried to explain different aspects of local heritage, the hill fort, the police station, all the pubs. He had through 4 panels. He told different stories. It's a brilliant project. Do look it up. And here he'd come up with the idea is in 4 panels to explain Wattsdyke. And he says Wattsdyke is named after a mythical hero called Wade or Wat. And then he goes, archaeologists think it was built around AD 820 by Cynwulf, the king of Mercia. And then he goes, Cynwulf also fought fierce wars with the Welsh kings of Powys. And there he is doing so. And then today, the heritage trail runs all the way along Wattsdyke from Llanymynech to Holywell. So you get a sense of how the monument still has traces in the landscape. So I teamed up with John and we did a Wattsdyke Wrexham comic heritage trail. This is the English version. We did a Welsh version to try and explain to local people what is Wattsdyke. So people know this very big but fragmentary and damaged monument, how it operates in the landscape. And so we ended up doing 10 panels, forgive me, in a section of Wattsdyke that runs through the suburbs of Wrexham. And I'll come back to these in a little while. These are quite small and you probably won't be able to appreciate it. But we tried to show here how it may have looked like in the past. Here how you can see traces of it near Handy. Here in the back of houses in Garden Village. I'll skip this one, but you can probably guess where I'm going with this. This is Wattsdyke running through past Wrexham General Railway Station and the Kairas football stadium. Then the cemetery, as it would have appeared when it was being used in the Victorian age. Here's a Welsh people being turned away or being told to go somewhere to perhaps to have their pay tribute or pay tax to cross the border. Here's an abandoned Wattsdyke in the Norman period where at Erddig they built a Motte and Bailey castle near the line of the abandoned Wattsdyke. Here it being destroyed when Eames was building the landscape of Erddig. Archaeologists investigating Wattsdyke. Sir Cyril Fox in the 1920s. Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust archaeologists in recent times, and then people enjoying the landscape and the walk and the trail in rain and sun with apps on phones and maps in hand. So you get a sense of the landscape. And here at the Crispin Lane site near Wrexham's football ground, the Kairas is just down there. Here's me and John. There's me over there. You're doing a video explaining why we chose to show it here, a reconstructed bank by the Premier Inn between the railway line and the Premier Inn. This bit of bank is the line of Wattsdyke, but I don't think anyone knows it's there. So let's go back to Welcome to Wrexham, because the problem is that no one is interpreting this monument. And the Welcome to Wrexham TV show's first series in 2022 tried to explain these linear earthworks, and they did it in what I would say as an expert is the most feckless way possible. So what they did is they had this episode was trying to explain for people who don't know what Wales is, for American audience, the wide world of Wales with the spoof TV sports program. So it's supposed to be light-hearted and funny. And it's part of that telling that underdog story. Don't worry, you won't learn much. I expect you'll retain almost none of it. And the author and YouTuber John Green is deployed as an authority to give a crash course on Wales, following the style of his YouTube videos. And he calls it a land of majesty, dampness, and epic place names. We're going to need some history, he says, to explain it. And in this short clip, of which I could say much, and I will keep my expletives to myself, he tries to explain the history of Wales. And I'll just give you the opening. I'll read this out, and I won't correct it. You can do your own homework and work out what is wrong here. But I think the point would say that there's not a single sentence here that is correct or even close to correct. But he says, John Green, the celebrity YouTuber and author, says, as early as 1000 BCE, the Celts were living in what we now call Wales. Centuries later, the Romans took over the region before leaving in the early 5th century. And by the 6th, the country was a patchwork of independent tribes and kingdoms. But around that time, touchstones of what was to become a unified Welsh culture were starting to emerge. Then, in the 8th century, an English king built a man-made earthwork, which is like a fancy archaeological term for piles of rock, soil and rock, along what was to become the border between England and Wales. But the English kept peering over that tall earthy fence, by which I mean invading. And then he skips to the Edwardian conquest and then to the unification of England and Wales in the Act of Union in the reign of Henry VIII, and then the Rebecca riots, the football club, and that's the history of Wales. And I'm not going to swear or be angry. It's fine. It's all fine. Yes. Anyway, the point I want to make here as a final point is, what did they miss? They missed this. They missed Wat Dyke, because they didn't seem to understand from their visualization that Wat Dyke runs right past the football ground that they have spent 4 series and millions of dollars telling the story of Wrexham's heritage and its connection to sports. And they've got the traces of the line of Wat Dyke running right past the football ground. And did they miss this, or did they deliberately ignore it? And that's what Valerie's asking in the comment section. I wonder if Wat Dyke has not been mentioned because it could be viewed as a record of English versus Welsh. Well, at one level, you see, that's the interesting thing. It could be positively used to discuss that rivalry. And it could be positively celebrated that it's redundant, that if you took it literally, and you shouldn't, then Wrexham is in England, the football ground's in Wales. Maybe that's the reason. That perhaps might upset local people. If you, of course, that's not the way it is, because, of course, it wasn't built by the English. But if you just use the narrative saying the English built a big wall, a dike, they didn't use the word dike because that's offensive to Americans who think it only has one meaning. But they built the linear earthwork. Then you've got a problem for yourself, right? So it's what I'm finding. I haven't got an answer. I'm just finding it really fascinating that they haven't mentioned it. So we've done work looking at this, and this is my publications on Wat Dyke. But in this story of links between place, memory, identity, and football, Wat Dyke doesn't feature. There's no line in the landscape. So what are my final thoughts? Where's this going? Well, this is a preliminary reflection. I haven't published this. This is just some ideas that I thought I'd share with you for the first time. Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you. But I wanted to tell you that as a final thoughts, Welcome to Wrexham Phenomenon allows us to explore football history, heritage, and archaeology on TV and in the real world landscape. So this isn't just an abstract. This actually is in real landscapes. And it's a selective, valorized vision of heritage regeneration, incorporating what I would say is called, I would refer to as banal nationalisms. It's like kind of a Welshness that's kind of fuzzy, ahistorical. Oh, there was some stuff that happened in the past, but we won't go into any detail, and we won't actually give you any accurate facts. There's a few Welsh flags, football, la la la, hooray, hooray. We bring in some tourism. Thank you, good night. It's banal. It's simple, everyday. It's not refined. There's no deep time story. And the question is, does a forgotten frontier of Wat Dyke challenge and perhaps even subvert this cozy vision of club, city, community rehabilitation through football? Wat Dyke is long lost and seems to be long forgotten, and they seem to want to keep it that way. And why is that? Why don't they celebrate that as one aspect of the complex story of Wrexham, its identity, its history? Follow Archaeodeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.